describe yourself as a satirist?
I hate labels. It's one of those. Yeah, I was actually reading up on it recently about Dobell, William Dobell. He won one of the year's competitions with a portrait he had done of Australian judge, and some of the runners-up got so bitter and twisted that they contested his victory and said, in fact, it wasn't a portrait. It was like a satirical caricature.
Okay.
So the legal beagles and you know the intelligentsia of Australia argued this endlessly through the courts, trying to find the demarcation line between these brandings.
Oh, what was the finding then?
Well, I mean, how can you? It's like looking out the window and trying to see at exactly what point the water from the Huranui merges with the Pacific Ocean,
Right.
you know,
So,
and trying to put AA signs along that. You know, I mean, it's madness.
what's your best definition of art?
3 words. Feelings made fact.
That first show of yours, I don't know when it was, in the 1970s, it just knocked me off my feet. It was, I was seeing something I'd never seen before. I don't know whether it had value or not, but there was a beautiful picture of Christchurch Cathedral with the Stevenson square pie skewered to the steeple.
Right, square pie or pie squared.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
That was the name of the painting?
Yeah.
Why did you paint that?
Well, that period was a pivotal one. I'd been overseas for 6 years, stooging around the globe, living on the island of Eos, where, you know, after a while, oh God, another perfect day, you know. Yeah, suddenly the craziness, the stimulus of the Canterbury climate and everything, yeah, it just gradually kind of sent its tendrils up my trouser legs and into, you know, and I never dreamt. Anyway, so here I was rediscovering my hometown and sort of tinkering with it in the process. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's what I was up to. And,
So what are you trying
the
to say?
Stevie Square pie was such an essential part of that mid-New Zealand culture, you know. I remember, yeah, friend Rick Reed was in the Zetland pub early one morning when Mr. Stevie came in himself with the wooden tray on his head.
Yeah.
And one of the guys doing the dawn parade around the bar said, "You're Stevie, aren't you?" And he said, "Yeah. I found something really weird in one of your pies the other day." And he went, "Oh, what was that?" He said, "A piece of meat."
The wind features a lot in your life. Is that a constant enemy?
It's interesting, in a fence line across from us here, there's a ragged bit of corrugated iron trapped. And then when the wind decides to get malevolent, the first indicator, it'll be a beautiful day, and then you'll just hear the sound of that fragment of corrugated iron starting to rattle, and then just gradually the big flywheel of the nor'wester will build up. And before we planted, I mean, we had days where I was spread-eagled over the front door. The windows were bowing, you know. So it could wind itself up, and it's a rogue wind. It's not like the southerly where it's just a big wedge that, it'll slumber. You know, in profile it is like a sheet of corrugated iron, where it has certain touch points across the plains.
I've seen you do that in your paintings. It's there. And aside from landscapes, you're quite at ease with portraits as well. That one you did of Robert Muldoon, which ended up not being in a square frame. It ended up being almost turned into a jigsaw. What was that?
Yeah, well, as I initially said before, my immediate circumstances made me think seriously about political matters. I was still intrigued about the characters that the political realm attracted, and of course Muldoon was he was brilliant.
He was brilliant.
He was paradoxical, which was intriguing. I mean, I think all sorts of factions loved, you know, the fact that he could be the narrator for the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was, you know, pretty damn fringy, and what did he grow gladiolus, or I mean, he was, and yet he was capable of just being this, you know, this sort of grotesque, this almost swinging from, you know, he had all these facets to his persona which intrigued me. But yeah, it was an interesting face. He actually had quite large muscles. If you did him sort of egg-shaped, it didn't work out. Yeah. But he had these muscles at the side of his jaw that were made for like chewing up bone.
Yeah, or politicians,
yeah. And so if you captured those, then you sort of had him. You know?
All right, so then why Marmite?
Yeah, I mean, I do love Marmite, I've got to say. You know, and politicians tangling with breakfast products is, you know, Cleopatra with the milk, and I don't know that cornflakes have had such a big look in, but anyway, it just seemed like a down home somehow to parallel some of these things. So yeah, so I had him just slicking his hair back, and of course it allowed me the atrocious pun of man of might. I'd taken it into the Windsor Gallery, and it was the week before the 1986 elections, and yeah, the very genteel director of the gallery said, would I mind if he just plonked it in the display window, seeing it was sort of so topical. And shortly thereafter, this gentleman gave a note to the girl behind the reception saying that, you know, this work was indeed sort of revolting and disgusting, I think was his general theme. Could it, you know, he needed to be removed. And when he went back at 5 and it was still there, he snatched it from the window, broke it over his knee, and the director's 2 sons were out the back framing, and of course they got him in a crash tackle out in High Street, and they all thrashed around until the appropriate people showed up. So yeah, it turned out that unwittingly I'd created this lethal mix of Marmite representing the assailants' Seventh-day Adventistness, the sanitarium health food, possibly. And although he purported not to be a Muldoon supporter, he felt that I had a man who had represented his country in the Valley of Death was being maligned in some way.
One of the best portraits of yours, I remember, is the Peckinpah Preoccupation, your portrait of John Lloyd. I think it was painted in the mid-1970s.
Yeah, it was done to settle a $15 debt that I'd got myself into during a fishing trip that we did into the Sound.
What about portraiture then? You enjoy portraiture. You're able to catch. People are very envious of that light touch where you can catch a person's personality in a few strokes.
Well, yeah. I mean, as I said with regards to the Muldoon one, I don't believe a portrait. If you just record the architecture of a person's physiognomy, you're showing the front door of a building without indicating what's going on inside it. You know?
Tell me that. I'm really interested in that. I was sculpting a horse recently. You know, there's not a lot of character on this particular horse. So although I've got the architecture right, I haven't got the feeling of the horse, and I wonder if I'm not digging deeply enough. That maybe you have to actually dig deeper than reality to get reality out. Is that what portraiture should be? You're looking for...
Yeah, you've got to... I think with everybody, there are certain organs that through which the bulk of their personality might flow. And with the horse thing, I went down that trail myself recently, and instead of examining all I suggested the bulk of its anatomy, and then I found... It was a rendering I was doing of a horse that I sketched. I'm starting to speak Old English, I'm getting so excited. A horse that was thundering along Gorbay Beach at low tide.
Beautiful.
And just stretched out with the young girl on its back. And then I came to realise as I was starting to render the 3D version of it, that its nostrils, the line of its body, the elongated line of its body, indicating that was enough. But the nostrils, I let the eyes recede, and just the nostrils somehow of a horse, when they were totally dilated, they actually said all I wanted to say about that part of it. You know.
So some of your paintings, I'd say, are social commentary. I think you're describing the world, but you're not actually making any judgments in it. And I think Billy Collins, the poet, said it is important for us as artists not to judge society or say what it should do, but to hold up a mirror for society to see themselves clearly.
For a while, when the Christchurch Star existed, I did quite a few works covering court cases. I know one of the journalists there was sort of a mail order bride trapped in the city by some malevolent businessman who had turned her life to hell, and he provided the narrative and I provided the picture. Obviously it wasn't exactly using her, and I was able to weave some other ingredients, so between the two it created quite a powerful piece that elicited funding from the readership that got her out of the jam. Yeah, stuff like that. I had one piece just 2 shows ago, and the image was of a stringy, burned out old geezer who of the same stable as myself, streaking through a forest in his socks. The forest sort of became, I didn't know it was going to do it, but I was thrilled when it did. The branches became nerve ends, it became, neurons, and anyway, he's got a plastic bag, and just out of his grasp are these scraps of paper that are being blown ahead of him. My best friend's name is, and he's just snatching for it where it's snagged on a branch, and various other pivotal bits of his informative life and he's gathering them all up, sticking them in his plastic bag, which has a ruptured bottom. So they're still, and I got a letter from a guy, a Scottish guy who was about to leave New Zealand after living here for some years, and his family had frozen in front of that work in the gallery, and his 9-year-old and his 13-year-old son had looked at it, and they said, "Is that what Granddad's going through?" And he'd never been able to explain the malaise that had beset their favourite grandfather. But when they saw it rendered diagrammatically, if you will, suddenly it was all clear, and he said the family stood in front of it, and he was able to just iron out that big crinkle. Incident, probably a couple of years ago now, which I think back on and sort of feast on. It was just a random little incident, but it drove a pin through the centre of my kind of schmozzly lifestyle and art practice and existence. This particular lady came knocking on the door, and she wanted to meet us, and she wanted to see my studio. And her own art calling was of a high discipline. They were botanic, essentially, beautiful compositions of these botanic forms. She stood in the doorway, and she looked around at the sort of fruit salad of general madness. And she went, "Yes, well, it seems to me," and I went, "Uh-oh, here we go." She didn't say young man, but it was sort of implied in brackets. "It seems to me that you have been having fun." And I can live with that. That's what I've been doing. Yeah. And it gave me immense satisfaction.